Moving on. This is the written account of Adam's line. Now, so we're on a new account now. We just got actually done reading about Adam, so now we're going to be reading the written account of Adam's line. When God created man, so we've gone from the beginning in Genesis 1:1 to the account of the heavens and the earth and they were created in Genesis 2:4. Now to the written account of Adam's line in 5:1. This is a written account of Adam's line. Fans are blowing my papers around. Actually, I'm kind of in a slightly different position than I've been before when I've done this. And the angle is just a little bit different, so it's blowing me around a little bit differently. Get away from that. No. You stay right there. We were supposed to rule over and subdue the beasts of the earth. Let's see here. Let's see exactly how it's written. Genesis 1. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over every living creature that moves along the ground. So it's my job to rule over you, cat. I have authority straight from God to rule over you. I don't really rule over them. They kind of do whatever they want to do. They don't listen to me very much. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Just like when man makes gods, he makes him in his likeness too. He created them male and female and blessed them. And when they were created, he called them man. Or Adam, which comes from the word Adamah, which is a term for the ground. When Adam had lived 130 years, he had a son in his own likeness, in his own image, which means flawed and failed. And he named him Seth. So all the stuff that happened with Cain and Abel happened before the 130-year mark. Doesn't say how old Adam was when he had Cain. Eve would have been this old too, because he was created the same year Adam was. Well, presumably. Same day, day 6 of creation. We don't know how long they were in the garden together after that. I've always assumed it was pretty much right away before Genesis 3 happens. But they were made on the same day, day 6 of creation. So they were the same age. So Eve was 130 as well. But we don't know how old they were when Cain was born or when Abel was born, or when the incident happened between Cain and Abel. But we do know they were 130 when Seth was born, and Seth was born after the incident with Cain and Abel, because Abel was already dead. After Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. He presumably had sons and daughters before Seth was born too. Altogether, Adam lived 930 years, and then he died. When Seth had lived 105 years, he became the father of Enosh. And after he became the father of Enosh, Seth lived 807 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Seth lived 912 years, and then he died. When Enosh had lived 90 years, he became the father of Kenan. And after he became the father of Kenan, Enosh lived 815 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Enosh lived 905 years, and then he died. When Kenan had lived 70 years, he became the father of Mahalalel. And after he became the father of Mahalalel, Kenan lived 840 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Kenan lived 910 years, and then he died. When Mahalalel had lived 65 years, he became the father of Jared. And after he became the father of Jared, Mahalalel lived 830 years, and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Mahalalel lived 895 years, and then he died. When Jared had lived 162 years, he became the father of Enoch. Not the same Enoch I read about earlier, that's a descendant of Cain, the son of Cain, a different Enoch. But after he became the father of Enoch, Jared lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Jared lived 962 years, and then he died. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. And after he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Enoch lived 365 years. He's a young man compared to these other guys. Enoch walked with God, and then he was no more, because God took him away. In other words, he died. When Methuselah had lived 187 years, he became the father of Lamech, a different Lamech than the other Lamech. And after he became the father of Lamech, Methuselah lived 782 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Methuselah lived 969 years, and then he died. When Lamech had lived 182 years, he had a son. He named him Noah, and said, "He will comfort us in the labor and painful toil of our hands, caused by the ground the Lord has cursed." After Noah was born, Lamech lived 595 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Lamech lived 777 years, and then he died. After Noah was 500 years old, he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. There was definitely a formula to that passage, wasn't there? There was definitely a repetition that was being followed. We are tracking, now remember, this all goes back to that seed line promise, that seed promise that God made to Eve, actually as part of the curse on Satan in Genesis 3, when he said, "I'll put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and hers." And now we are tracking the development of that seed promise. What did they know about this? I don't know. I mean, no, I know they didn't. Okay, they didn't realize that the full fulfillment of the seed promise would come in the person of Jesus Christ. I mentioned last time that the first century Jew Josephus, Jewish writer Josephus, did not know that the ultimate fulfillment of this passage was found in the work of Jesus Christ, who bruised the serpent's head once and for all on the cross. And Josephus lived in a time when he could have known that, because it had already happened. By the time Josephus was born, the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ had already occurred, and the church was already growing. All throughout his life, the church would have been spreading all around him in his midst. He was in Rome for a while. The church was there too. He went back to Judea and Jerusalem at the time when the church was still there, although I believe the Christians were being squeezed out. After the war was over, he went back to Rome, and the church was still there then. He had every opportunity and access to know about the Christian way of thinking. He probably knew about it, like in terms of being aware of its existence, but as far as I can tell, did not become one. And he did not know the full fulfillment of the passage, the curse on Satan, the serpent, in Genesis 3. He thought that, like I said last time, that the passage was fulfilled. Literally, the literal fulfillment of that passage was men are supposed to kill snakes by using their heels to step on their heads. We know, of course, from the New Testament that the full fulfillment of this passage, this promise, is found in Jesus. So we know also then that, Adam, Seth, Noah, his sons, Abraham, down to Moses, these people didn't actually know the full fulfillment of this promise. When they're tracking the seed, the genealogy from Abraham now down to Noah, Moses' intention ultimately is to get us to Israel, which he's going to do. But he doesn't realize, and then Israel, of course, is very careful about their genealogies. We're going to have a ton. I mean, if you thought chapter 5 of Genesis was dry, okay, we're going to have a ton of stuff like this in the future. And this one was actually fairly easy to read kind of dramatically and keep going, because there's such a a constant repetition of when this guy was born, he had when this guy was so and so years old, he had this guy as a son, he had other sons and daughters, he had a total number of years, and then he died. And it always ends with, and then he died. Because it's reminding, no matter how long those lives lived. Now remember, okay, so we get hung up on these long lifespans. Well, I think it's probably a pretty good chance that Moses' generation did too. You know, when Moses comes along, they're not living 900 plus years at that time. Moses himself, they say, lived 820 years, which is longer than what we normally see today. But he didn't live 920 years or 820 years. And like I said before, in the cultures around Israel, there were stories of kings and people living thousands of years. So this is actually somewhat tame compared to the lifespans that ancient people were supposed to have in the culture, in the literature of the cultures around Israel at this time. So there was in the mindset of the people in that region of the world at that point in time, there was this idea that men used to live much longer lives than they do now. That the short lifespans that we have now, or that men had then, are not the way they're supposed to be. And if you go back far enough in time, you're going to find men who lived much longer lives. Again, these years, these dates are actually somewhat tame compared to the thousands of years that you'll see in the Sumerian king list, for example. So this is just reinforcing that concept. Now you can make a timeline of this and go as far back as you want to date things as precisely as possible. And I'm not here necessarily to say that it's right or wrong to do that, or to say whether or not that's the right way. I think we get caught up over that in a way that we probably shouldn't. I think we get caught up over proving Genesis 1 to 11 to be literally true in a way that we don't really need to, because I don't believe Genesis 1 to 11 was intended to be read that way. And we miss a lot of the context surrounding the chapters, surrounding the passages, and we don't understand how to read it the way that it would be most meaningful to us today, or even the way it was meaningful to the people who first heard it in Moses' day. Remember, they wouldn't have read it, they would have heard it. And so when Moses is coming out of his tent and he's reading this to the people, or Aaron, or whoever it was that did this, whatever Levite or priest was responsible for reading this to the people at the time. Like, these people, when they looked around them, they did not see people living 700, 800, 900 years. Okay, they saw maybe some of their older men living 100 years, but a lot of them not making it that far. And so we read this and our eyes kind of like jump out of our heads and we're just saying, how is that possible? Well, you know what? Most generation probably thought that too. In fact, I believe they're supposed to think that, because when you go through that passage, every paragraph, of course, we have paragraphs now. Originally, they didn't have paragraphs, but we format our text with paragraphs. When you read any English copy of this text, you're going to read this chapter is going to be divided into paragraphs. And at the end of every paragraph, you're going to see the same 4 words, and then he died. So the emphasis is on the death. Like, no matter how long these guys lived, 969 years, 962 years, 800 years, 777 years, they're dead. It's like it doesn't matter how long they made, 930 years in the case of Adam. Doesn't matter how long they made it. The fact that the important thing is at the end of their days, they died. At the end of their paragraph, when their account is over, they died. Okay? And that is like the dominant thematic element there, in my view. When I read it out loud, and that's what I tried to emphasize when I read it there, is that no matter how long they got to live in their flawed bodies, in their sinful, fallen state, in the years of, close to the beginning of time after the fall of man, no matter how long they may have lived back then, they still died. And their work we saw there at Lamech, the father of Noah, their work was still painful, their work was still toil, their work was still drudgery. It's because they got to live long lives in a close to perfect. Remember, the world was created to be perfect. According to this, the way it's presented here is that in Genesis 2, the world was made perfect. Our sin messed it up. God cursed the ground, and the world is no longer perfect. It's been cursed. The farther back you go in time, the closer you get to that perfect world. So you have fewer sicknesses, fewer diseases, a climate that is very different, possibly, than what we experience today. But even then, Lamech talks about Noah comforting them in their toil and in their labor. So whatever toil and labor the generations before the flood felt and experienced, they had it. They had toil and labor despite their long lives. Um, so what Moses is doing as he's tracking, then eventually we track the human ancestry of Jesus all the way back to the beginning through this. But Moses doesn't know that. What he thinks he's doing is he's tracking the genealogy of Israel. And we're going to be reading a lot of genealogies as we go through this. And they're not always going to be as... If you thought this was dry, I mean, we got passages in the future that are much, much drier than this.